Every day, around 13,000 aircraft are in the air at the same time, more than there are towns in some countries. Each one carries an onboard computer, a tracking system, satellite communication. A plane simply cannot vanish without a trace. But it does. Not once. Not twice. 4 stories, 4 aircraft, 4 mysteries, one of which happened less than 11 years ago, and which no government, no intelligence agency on Earth has solved to this day. We begin with the most recent, the one you think you know everything about, but don't know the most important part. March 8, 2014, midnight. A Boeing 777 takes off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport, the most technologically advanced wide-body aircraft of its time. 239 people on board. The route to Beijing, standard, overnight, long established. 38 minutes later, the co-pilot contacts ground control. "Good night, Malaysian 370, a routine phrase, a handoff between control zones. And that's it. Never again. Here is what matters to understand from the start. This is not a Cessna, not a private charter. The Boeing 777 has triple redundancy for all critical systems, 2 independent transponders, a satellite antenna, and its own digital bus that automatically sends a ping to a satellite every few minutes. This aircraft was literally engineered never to be lost. Yet at 1:21 in the morning, it vanished from civilian radar screens. It didn't crash. It didn't explode. It simply disappeared. What followed is what aviation safety specialists describe as the most inexplicable event in the history of commercial aviation. Malaysian military authorities pulled records from their radar, not civilian radar, which relies on a transponder signal from the aircraft, but military radar, which detects any large object in the air regardless of whether it wants to be seen. And on those records, they saw this. The aircraft that should, by all accounts, have been lying at the bottom of the South China Sea was still flying. It had turned 180 degrees, crossed the entire Malay Peninsula from east to west, passed almost directly over the capital it had just departed, entered the Strait of Malacca, and headed northwest. It was flying in exactly the opposite direction from Beijing. 2 independent communication devices had been switched off, one after the other. To disable the first, you turn a switch in the cockpit. To disable the second, you need to know the aircraft's construction well enough to access the right wiring beneath the cockpit floor. Accidental failure, according to Boeing engineers, is virtually ruled out. This was done by someone who knew what they were doing. Then came the data that turned the investigation completely on its head. Engineers at satellite company Inmarsat discovered that the aircraft's antenna had continued sending brief automatic pings to a satellite for 7 hours after the disappearance. These signals carried no coordinates. They simply confirmed the equipment was operating, the way your phone pings a cell tower even when you're not using it. But from the travel time of each signal, you can calculate the distance from the satellite. Not a point, a circle. 7 circles over 7 hours. Engineers overlaid them against data on 2 possible corridors, north and south. The northern route, through India, Pakistan, and China, was eliminated immediately. The military radars of those countries had detected nothing. The south remained. The Indian Ocean. One of the most desolate places on the planet. No islands, no regular shipping lanes. Nothing but water 5 kilometers deep. 7 hours into the flight, the satellite caught a final ping. After that, silence. Australia spent $200 million on the search. Underwater robots combed an area comparable to a small European country. The seabed in that region turned out to be an underwater mountain range. Volcanic peaks kilometers high, canyons, caves, fields of solidified lava. Before the search began, this stretch of ocean floor had never been explored. On charts, it appeared as a flat, blue plain. In reality, the Alps underwater. The aircraft was never found, but debris was. In July of 2015, a resident of Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean found a piece of wing covered in barnacles on the beach. Forensic analysis confirmed it was part of that very Boeing. Then more fragments began appearing all along the western coast of Africa, in Mozambique, Tanzania, Madagascar, South Africa. More than 30 pieces in total. Currents had carried them 1,000 kilometers apart. The official 2018 report, prepared by the Malaysian investigation team, named no perpetrator and no cause. It stated that the communication systems had likely been deliberately disabled, and that the aircraft was likely under control at the time of the turn. Who exactly was in control? Unknown. Theories had by then accumulated widely, from hackers taking over the autopilot to an atmospheric phenomenon science has yet to fully explain. One of the least extreme and most discussed, that the captain intentionally flew the aircraft into oblivion. On the home flight simulator of the captain, investigators found one virtual route that almost exactly matched the real one. Takeoff from Kuala Lumpur, a turn west, heading south, the Indian Ocean, fuel exhaustion. But thousands of other routes on that same simulator went to London, Sydney, Los Angeles. This was a man who simply loved to fly in virtual space. No direct evidence was ever found. In 2024, private company Ocean Infinity announced a new search expedition with next-generation equipment in an expanded search zone. Whether the aircraft is there or not, we will find out. But even if it is found, the flight recorder batteries died 10 years ago. What remains on them? Unknown. Somewhere in Beijing, a mother keeps her son's phone charged, the one he asked her to charge before boarding. 11 years. The next mystery takes us to Tokyo. January 30th, 1979, Narita Airport, Tokyo. A Brazilian Airlines cargo Boeing 707 sets course for Los Angeles. On board, 6 crew members and 20 tons of cargo. Among that cargo, 53 paintings. Their creator was Manabu Mabe, an artist whose biography deserves a film of its own. Born in Japan, but at age 10 his family emigrated to Brazil, to a remote village in São Paulo state, where they grew coffee. Mabe grew up amid Brazilian nature with Japanese pencils in his pocket, painting parrots and lagoons on rainy Sundays, and gradually developed his own style, a lyrical abstraction where Japanese restraint meets Brazilian expressiveness. By 1979, he was one of the most recognizable artists in Latin America, with work exhibited in Tokyo, New York, and Paris. The 53 paintings returning from a Tokyo exhibition were valued at $1.24 million. In today's terms, many times more. The aircraft took off at 8:23 in the evening. At 8:45, the crew made contact with Narita Air Traffic Control for the last time. 38 minutes later, when the aircraft should have reached its next waypoint, silence. Controllers called the aircraft for more than an hour. No response. No distress signal. No deviation from the last recorded heading. The search operation lasted 8 days. Ships and aircraft combed the northern Pacific. Nothing was found. No debris, no oil slick, nothing that could point to a crash site. Brazilian newspapers wrote at the time, "This is the only commercial jet in history to have vanished without leaving any trace whatsoever." The flight's captain, Gilberto Araújo da Silva, was a legend of Brazilian aviation. 55 years old, more than 23,000 flying hours. In 1973, he had been flying another Boeing 707 when a fire broke out in the lavatory. Smoke filled the entire aircraft and the cockpit. The captain put on his oxygen mask, but couldn't read the instruments. He decided to land the aircraft in an onion field outside Paris, rather than risk populated neighborhoods. Most passengers did not survive the smoke, but the captain's decision technically saved those who could still be saved. French authorities called him a hero. That same man, 6 years later, vanished without a word over the Pacific. The official finding: sudden depressurization. The crew, by this theory, lost consciousness within minutes. The aircraft continued on autopilot until the fuel ran out and came down somewhere in the ocean far beyond the search zone. This explains the absence of a distress call, but not everything else. Because there is another theory, still discussed in aviation circles today. In 1976, Soviet pilot Viktor Belenko defected to Japan in a classified MiG-25 fighter jet. Japanese authorities allowed American engineers to conduct a complete technical analysis of the aircraft, the first time Western specialists had ever accessed it. When the work was done, the MiG was disassembled, boxed, and returned to the Soviet Union. When Soviet officials opened the boxes, they found that around 20 components of the aircraft were missing. Where they went, officially unknown. One version holds that these components were loaded onto Varig 967 and that Soviet intelligence knew about it. Supporting that theory is a fact that is otherwise difficult to explain. When relatives of passengers and journalists began calling Varig with questions about the cargo, company employees received an internal directive not to comment on the composition of the cargo or the status of the flight. Former employees spoke about this decades later. Manabu Mabe's paintings have never surfaced anywhere in the world. Not one of the 53 works has been sold, appeared at auction, or entered a private collection. For the art market, this is a mystery in itself. Paintings of that caliber are not hidden in an attic. They are sold. Sooner or later, they are sold. But not these. Moving on, we arrive in South America. There is a place in the Andes that most people have never heard of. Tupungato Volcano, 6,570 meters, one of the highest peaks in South America. It sits roughly 50 miles east of Santiago, close by Andean standards. But reaching it is extraordinarily difficult. On average, only one expedition per year receives permission from the Argentine army to approach this mountain. Some years, none at all. It was in the glacier of this volcano that an aircraft lay for 50 years. August 2nd, 1947. A British airliner, Stardust, departed Buenos Aires for Santiago with 11 people on board. Among the passengers, Paul Simpson, a British King's messenger carrying diplomatic documents for the British Embassy in Chile, and one Cassis Said Atala, a Chilean national of Palestinian origin, rumored to be carrying a diamond sewn into the lining of his coat. An ordinary flight, except there was no such thing as an ordinary flight across the Andes in 1947. The pilot, Reginald Cook, was a highly experienced Royal Air Force veteran. The aircraft climbed to 24,000 feet to clear the mountains. At 5:41 in the afternoon, the radio operator made contact with the dispatcher in Santiago and transmitted a standard message. Estimated time of arrival, 5:45, 4 minutes away. And then, one last word. In Morse code. S-T-E-N-D-E-C. The dispatcher in Santiago didn't understand, asked for a repeat. The aircraft repeated it. S-T-E-N-D-E-C again. The dispatcher asked for clarification. The aircraft transmitted a third time. S-T-E-N-D-E-C and disappeared. The aircraft never landed in Santiago. Search operations found nothing. Theories multiplied. From escaping Nazi war criminals, it was the era when many were fleeing to Latin America, to abduction by foreign intelligence. It was August of 1947, just weeks after the Roswell incident. The public was ready for any explanation. The answer came only 51 years later. In 1998, two Argentine mountaineers climbing Tupungato found a Rolls-Royce engine among the ice, along with pieces of mangled metal and scraps of clothing. In the year 2000, a military expedition went in. They found propellers, wheels, one of them intact and still inflated. They found human remains, identified by DNA in 2002. They found Stardust. What they determined was this. The pilot, flying through cloud, had likely entered a jet stream, powerful high-altitude winds about which aviation in 1947 still knew very little. The jet stream over the Andes that day was blowing at up to 185 miles per hour. It had slowed the aircraft dramatically, though the instruments showed no change in speed. The pilot concluded he had already cleared the mountain range and began his descent. But he had not yet cleared the mountains. Stardust, at cruise speed, flew straight into the upper face of the glacier. The impact triggered an avalanche that instantly buried the wreckage. In the decades that followed, snowfall drove it deeper, and then the glacier, slowly, a few meters per year, began carrying it back to the surface. The mystery of the crash was solved, but the word remained. Stendek. It appears in no aviation dictionary from 1947. It matches no communication code. In the Oxford Dictionary of Phrase and Fable, it appears with a single definition: A mysterious word from the last transmission of the missing aircraft Stardust. Its meaning has never been established. Several hundred attempts to decode it have been made since 1947. One theory, it's an anagram of descent. Perhaps the radio operator, suffering from hypoxia at 24,000 feet in an unpressurized aircraft, scrambled the letters. But how did he make the same mistake 3 times in a row? Another theory. It's an abbreviation for some urgent message that was never fully transmitted, but no signals expert has found a plausible decoding. A third, more technical theory. The Santiago dispatcher, hearing the signal at high speed, may have misread the Morse code, and the real word was the airport identifier for Santiago, SCTI, followed by the standard end-of-transmission signal. But the dispatcher heard the same thing 3 times. Stendek is still listed in dictionaries as an unexplained word. Literally, a word with no meaning, transmitted from the cockpit of an aircraft, already flying straight into a cliff face, repeated 3 times, as though someone desperately wanted it to be heard. What radio operator Dennis Harmer intended to say in those final seconds, no one knows. He was a highly trained professional with military experience. He had been transmitting in standard mode, loud and clear in the dispatcher's words. And that is precisely why 3 repetitions of an inexplicable word in place of the standard beginning descent have never ceased to trouble everyone who has studied this case. And finally, the central mystery. There is a place in Australia that locals call the edge of the world. Cape Otway, the southernmost point of mainland Australia, a jutting tongue of land above Bass Strait. A lighthouse stands here, built in 1848, one of the first in the country. Sailors feared these waters. Bass Strait, between Australia and Tasmania, is known for its unpredictable storms and currents. Before the lighthouse was built, dozens of ships were wrecked here. On October 21, 1978, Cape Otway was the last place on Earth where Frederick Valentich was seen. 20 years old, 150 hours of flight time, a dream of becoming a commercial pilot. That evening, he departed Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne in a rented Cessna 182, a route across Bass Strait to King Island, 40 minutes. He had flown this route before. At 7:06 in the evening, he made contact with Melbourne Air Traffic Control. His voice was calm. He reported an aircraft approximately 1,000 feet above him. The controller checked. No registered aircraft were in that area. The next 7 minutes became the most inexplicable audio recording in aviation history. Valentich described the object methodically and in detail, like someone trained to give precise observations. 4 bright lights, an elongated shape, a metallic, shiny surface, a green light. The object had passed over him at high speed, then turned, passed again, hovered above him motionless. "It's playing games with me," Valentich transmitted. Then the object vanished. Valentich reported engine trouble. The motor was beginning to rough idle. And then the object came back. "The strange aircraft is hovering above me again. It's hovering and it's not an aircraft." 17 seconds of open microphone. And a sound. A metallic scraping that Melbourne controllers described in various ways. A grinding, a scraping, a metallic clatter, but agreed on one thing. Nothing like it had ever been heard before. No technical analysis in the decades since has explained its nature. Then, silence. Forever. The search operation covered more than 1,000 square miles. A military reconnaissance aircraft, 8 civilian planes, and ships in the strait took part. 4 days. No trace. No body. No Cessna wreckage. Nothing. Amateur astronomers in 2013 offered one of the most reasoned, rational explanations. On that particular evening, Venus, Mars, Mercury, and the bright star Antares were arranged in an unusual configuration above Bass Strait. 4 points that an observer in the air might have merged into a single elongated object. Astronomers ran computer models and concluded this is what Valentich saw. The green light may have been the Cessna's own navigation light reflected in the cockpit glass. Under this theory, Valentich, a young pilot long fascinated by UFO reports, saw 4 planets, convinced himself it was something inexplicable, and began unconsciously putting the aircraft into a spiral, losing spatial orientation. The metallic scraping at the end of the recording, the sound a Cessna engine makes when losing thrust during a sharp maneuver. This explains much. But not one thing. Neither the aircraft nor the body was ever found. Bass Strait is not the Indian Ocean. It's a relatively small, well-charted, regularly used body of water. In a normal crash, wreckage is found. In 2021, reports emerged that official Australian investigation documents mention a discovery, a fragment of fuselage with a partial match to the aircraft's serial number, recovered from the strait some years after the disappearance. But this document has never received full public confirmation. There is one more detail that rarely gets mentioned. On the same evening, at roughly the same time Valentich was transmitting, an amateur photographer named Roy Manifold was setting up his camera at Cape Otway, directly beneath the pilot's flight path. He was shooting the sunset. When he developed his photographs, he found a dark shape in the corner of one frame. He assumed it was a film defect. Then he remembered the date. The negative was sent to a Kodak laboratory for analysis. They confirmed the film was sound, no developing error. The shape was in the image itself. The negative was then sent to American researchers for computer analysis. Their conclusion? The object in the photograph is a solid metallic form, approximately 23 feet in diameter, located about 1.25 miles from shore. What it was has never been established. 4 aircraft, 4 different eras, 4 different oceans and mountain ranges, and not a single final answer. In 1947, an aircraft sank into a glacier and lay there for 50 years before it was found. In 1978, a pilot made contact, spent 7 minutes describing something inexplicable, and vanished. In 1979, a cargo valued at $1 million dissolved over the Pacific, along with 6 people, and never appeared anywhere in 2014, the finest aviation investigation minds from a dozen countries spent years and hundreds of millions of dollars and closed the case without a single conclusion as to the cause. We have grown accustomed to thinking that at some point in history, nothing can simply disappear anymore. Satellites, radar, GPS, digital communication. The world has become too transparent for secrets of this scale. But each of these aircraft proves up, and as long as something lies at the bottom of the Indian Ocean that we cannot find, this story is not over. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day, and take